Well, hello there. My name is Mark Miles, and I love helping trainers, presenters, facilitators really take their results to the next level. So, in today's video, I want to talk to you about the concept of stories and storytelling. Now, this is an area that a lot of people get very wrong. And how I define wrong is essentially ineffective, or they are using it in a way that's actually sabotaging their results. And storytelling is a really, really, really powerful skill that when you master, you can plant seeds of thought and transformation in your audience's mind without them even realizing what you're doing. You see, a story is such a powerful thing because it actually goes behind the conscious filters that people have, and it goes straight to the unconscious mind and creates change, often without the audience members actually realizing it's going to take place or it is taking place. You see, a story is really great because a listener cannot help but actually see themselves in the story and see themselves as one of the characters, which is a really, really powerful thing for you to know as a trainer and presenter. Because essentially, you can present a message by using a third party story, third party episode, third party experience when you're talking about your own experience. And it's a really powerful alternative to saying you must do this or you can do this, or one way to approach this is third party stories or episodes of where the information is being used is a really powerful way to present the concepts that you may be sharing with your audience as you deliver your training. But as I said, a lot of people get it very wrong, i.e., they tell stories that go off on crazy tangents, and people are like, why are you telling me this? Or another thing could be maybe the story goes on for way too long and people they can't follow it. Or maybe there's just story after story after story after story, and people are like, hurry up and get to the content. Now, there's a number of different ways that stories can go off track, so to speak, and people can deliver them poorly. But the thing to keep in mind is that storytelling is an art form, and storytelling is something that when you get very good at, you are able to get really creative with how you deliver your stories. But let's go through a couple of fundamental facts around stories, first of all. Okay. So, number one is, as I said, it is something to get better at and practice and practice and practice and practice. Now, what I mean by that is when to tell them, how to tell them, and they essentially the point of the story is the most important thing, right? So the when, the how, and for what purpose are you telling the story? Those three things are really important to focus on. Okay. Next thing, you need to be aware of the types of stories that you're going to tell people, and I'll go through those types in just a moment. You need to be aware that ideally at the beginning of a session, you can tell a negative story. But you never want to finish your training session on a negative story. You always want to finish your training session on a really positive, uplifting story. Okay, that something's going to really plant a seed of possibility in the audience's mind. Okay, and this is something that people often get wrong: is that amateur trainers will often tell a negative story at the very end, and their audience will walk away feeling negative and attached those negative feelings to that trainer or presenter. Okay. So if you're crafting your training sessions, make sure that you always tell your negative story early on in the piece, within the first 5 or 10 minutes, but do not tell a negative story at the very end. Okay. Just don't do it. Don't do it. Decide how do you want your audience feeling at the end of your session and craft a story towards that. Okay. So now, next piece around stories is ideally tell your own stories or tell stories about things that you've seen in the news or things around you. Ideally, don't make up stories. Ideally, don't borrow stories unless you truly have to. Okay. So, the reason for that is if you're telling something that's not true, it's going to come across inauthentic, and the audience is going to lose, like they're not going to believe what you're actually telling them. Okay, so keep your stories authentic and connected with you as much as you can. Okay, so next types of stories. Let's get into it. So the first type of story is a transformational story, and that essentially you can call it a before and an after kind of story. So it could be about yourself or it could be about someone else. So before blah, 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 before knowing this information, before attending blah, blah, or before reading blah, blah book, this person was in this situation. After they did this, they were in that situation, and that was the result that they achieved. Okay, so very simple before and after story. Okay, next one, number two, is a what not to do. What not to do story. Okay. So that could be an episode that you may have seen in the news, or a big disaster, or maybe something that you've experienced, or something that you've seen out there that other people have experienced. Okay. So essentially, it's a what not to do story. Okay. And so it's going to pre-frame any context that you're about to go into, or any content you're about to share with the audience. So, for example, if you are teaching on business management, you could start your session with what not to do story, and about a company collapsing because the leadership didn't do X, Y, Z. And then that sets up the reason why people need to listen to your session and learn what you're about to teach them. All right, it's essentially a what not to do kind of um, framework in a learner's mind. It's like, okay, cool, that's what I shouldn't do. Good. Now I need to learn and listen up. Okay. Next type of story is essentially a personal discovery story. So that is essentially sounds like I discovered, and key point or key takeaway. Okay, so I'll say it again. I discovered, and then key takeaway. So that could sound something like early on in my career, I did X, Y, Z, and I discovered blah, and the key thing that I took away was blah. So an episode of that could be early on in my career. I worked with some high-level executives, and we were putting together an amazing program, and it was a great deal, and we were so excited. We walked into the room to have the negotiation, and we didn't get the deal. And I realized that ultimately, one of the biggest reasons we didn't get the deal was we didn't actually empathize with the other side. We didn't actually sit on the other side of the table metaphorically with them and think about, well, how would they receive the actual contract? How would they see it from their eyes? And from that point onwards, I discovered the importance of actually always looking at any materials I create from the other person's perspective. Okay. So again, that's just a very simple story that you can use to illustrate a key point or a key takeaway. Okay. So I discovered, and then the key takeaway was. Okay. Now, next type of story is the um, the half story. Now, I love this style because essentially you are creating an open loop in the audience's mind. Okay, so essentially that's kind of like starting half the story at the very beginning, then closing the story at the very end. Okay, and that a great example or simple example, that one is maybe you are teaching for example, let's go to the context of citizenship in Australia. So gaining citizenship in a country. So you could put up some photos of your grandparents that went to the citizenship ceremony. I said, here's my grandparents' citizenship ceremony. And this was the beginning of this was the, I guess, this was part of the process. And this is them starting the application, but they had a number of difficulties along the way. And today we're going to talk about those difficulties and how they got over them, and also how obviously you'll be able to get through those difficulties as well. Then at the very end, you show the final picture of them receiving their certificate. Okay, so essentially it's the point A and then point B, and you're closing off the journey for people. Okay, so that's kind of like the half story, and you're creating suspense by showing half of the situation, and then you close it off at the very end. Lastly, we have the horror story, okay, or the war story. And these you can essentially share throughout your training session. Now, you don't want to have too many of them because, again, people are going to feel morbid, people are going to feel like heavy, and it's not going to be a great feeling throughout the training session. But horror stories or war stories are definitely great things to share with the audience. Now, the flip side of a horror story is that of a positive or uplifting story. And you can share those again as many times as you want throughout your training session to illustrate how somebody used the information and got a great result. Okay, so very similar to a transformational result, like transformational story. Now, the key thing I want to leave you guys with is that stories change lives, laws don't. Stories change lives, laws don't. Say it again, stories change lives, laws don't. I'd like you to think about a time when someone told you a story and your behavior actually changed as a result. You see, many times people told me to wear a seatbelt. Many times people told me to stop using my mobile phone when driving. But the thing was, laws, so what? We pay the fine, we move on. Yet there was that time when my friend actually told me a story about when he was actually driving and he looked at his phone and he went through the orange light. And what he didn't actually realize was there was actually a car coming on the other side. And the car actually smashed into him and flipped over his car. The car rolled over. And as a result, the passenger actually broke their collarbone and the car was written off. And from that moment onwards, whenever I heard that story, I never used my mobile phone again. The story had an impact. The story is true, by the way. The story had an impact and it changed my behavior. But the $1,000 fines and the cameras out there and the TV ads about not using your mobile phone while driving, they didn't really have as much of an impact as the story that my friend told me. Story is true, by the way. And for me, it was such a great episode and illustration of stories change lives. Laws don't. Laws do have an impact, but it's kind of like the last phase of the enforcement, so to speak. You know, we all know and remember stories that have happened to ourselves, other people, and we remember stories that are in the news and the newspaper, and we have those in our minds. And, you know, think about what are some stories that have really impacted you, both positively and negatively, and that have really supported the decisions that you make in your life. And I want to end this video by encouraging you to become a story hunter. If you are a trainer, presenter, facilitator, coach, and mentor, become a story hunter and become somebody that gets very passionate about becoming a great storyteller. Because stories change lives when they are delivered better and better and better. So I want to encourage you when you're looking at developing your workshops or your training sessions, start to think about the content that you're delivering and start to think, all right, cool. What are relevant stories that I can add into this session to really drive home the point? And if you're delivering training and then ad hoc wise, you think of a story and you deliver it well, great. Write that down so you can deliver the same story at a later session as well. Okay. And you are always looking to, you know, if you discover gold as you're sharing your knowledge, write it down because you may be able to use that again later on, because these ideas you may discover in the moment, but they are exactly what you may need to drive home your key points. All right. So on that note, folks, just remember, get conscious of the stories that you share with people and start to realize the power of stories. Become a story hunter, look in the newspaper, start to see how different stories could correlate to the content that you teach. And remember, you may hear or you may overhear a great story. You may see something on TV, you may see it in the media, but all experiences are great content that you can share with others. So thanks so much for watching the video, and go out there, become a great story hunter and a great storyteller. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Oh, and don't forget to like, share, comment on the video. Love it if you could share this content around, because I really want to help people become even better at the art and science of delivering great training sessions.